It's Mailbag Day. On today's episode, we'll be breaking down the viewers' questions, including on whether Gavin McKenna is a better prospect than Connor Bedard.
You are Locked On NHL Prospects, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hello, and welcome back to Locked On NHL Prospects, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. On this show, we break down everything prospects related for you 5 days a week, Monday through Friday. I'm Sebastian Hyde, the USHL scout over at Elite Prospects, typically joined by Hattie Kalikesh, the QMJHL scout at Elite Prospects, who is unfortunately out with illness this week. And we have a very exciting episode here because we'll be answering the viewers' questions. We have 9 questions in this episode, 3 per segment, and some really various ones. We have a couple different kinds of topics with the questions. Some about Gavin McKenna, for instance, who is one of the top 2026 draft eligible, so looking very much into the NHL future, and others about even how me and Hattie had our paths as scouts. So a lot of different kinds of questions here today. But before we jump into the episode, today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $150 if your team wins. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started. So let's start off here with the first question of the day from Twitter, where Soft Serve Scouting asks, McKenna or Bedard? A very simple question, but an interesting one to answer. I mean, of course, it's difficult to compare two players that haven't actually played against each other in any meaningful games to have that as a barometer. Different age groups, of course. Connor Bedard now entering his second NHL season, and Gavin McKenna still having a full year ahead of him before being drafted, going into the next draft cycle, because he is only 2026 draft eligible talent. But I believe the two are also cousins or second cousins, so there's definitely a family connection there between the two. And two elite level players, some really creative players. Gavin McKenna is 6 feet, 165 pounds as a left shot forward, and he's been dominating the WHL for 2.5 years now, or actually just over 2 years. He's played parts of 3 different seasons already with the Medicine Hat Tigers, and he's now already wearing an A on his jersey in Medicine Hat as a 16-year-old. He only turned 17 later this month, and he is dominating the WHL. Gavin McKenna has 55 points, including 18 goals in just 27 games this season with Medicine Hat. He's running away with the scoring title in the WHL at the minute. And he's fantastic. He's really dynamic with the puck on his stick. He loves to create, and he loves to keep possession of the puck. In terms of the offensive zone cycle play, there's flashes that remind me of Jack Hughes stylistically. Very confident with the puck on his stick, constantly trying to create pockets of space for both himself and line mates to exploit. And he's dominated as well for Team Canada at the U17 level and the U18 level last season, where he played with Canada at the U18 World Championships in May, and he scored 10 goals and 20 points in just 7 games, and would have broken the all-time tournament scoring record if it hadn't been for James Hagan's potting 2 more points than he did at the same tournament. But between the two players, I don't think I have to really introduce Connor Bedard to this conversation. I would definitely still lean Connor Bedard. I've seen more of him, a lot more comfortable in terms of the NHL projection. We've seen him in the NHL for over a year now, and he's looked fantastic there from everything I've seen. And I think that there's just a level of game-breaking talent, of just being able to take control of the game all on his own, that Bedard has, and that he had at the same age as McKenna, that I don't quite see to the same extent, which is not to minimize the prospect that Gavin McKenna is in any way, shape, or form, because he is fantastic. He's going to be on Canada's World Junior roster this year, and potential first overall pick of this draft, Michael Misa, didn't even get a camp invite. So he's a really special talent to be on everyone's eyes, basically, and he has been ever since he made his WHL debut. And he's a special talent, and he showed that last season as well, scoring 97 points in just 61 games, including 34 goals. For those of you that may not be familiar with Gavin McKenna, I would recommend that you make yourselves more familiar, because he's a very skilled and talented hockey player, and I think that most people listening to this podcast are already more than aware of his talent. Now, moving on to the second question of the day. Friend of the show, Jay Forster, host of Locked on Columbus Blue Jackets, asks, talk to me about Luca Morelli, Sebastian. And yeah, Morelli's been insanely good this season in the OHL. This is a shockingly Columbus draft pick. He's a 6'2", 185-pound right shot defenseman who was picked in the third round at 86th overall by the Blue Jackets this past June in Las Vegas. And he has been lighting the OHL on fire from the blue line so far this year. After last season scoring 57 points in 67 games, really good production from the blue line for the Oshawa Generals. Morelli has already doubled his goal production from last year. We're going from 6 last season to 12 already this year, and adding to that 35 points total in 27 games. He's over the point per game mark, and he sits pretty high up in terms of Oshawa Generals scoring. He is second on that list, just 1 point behind Beckett Seneca, and a little bit ahead of Callum Ritchie, who has played about 12 less games. So being 2 points behind Morelli is certainly not a bad thing there for Callum Ritchie, the Colorado Avalanche prospect who has 33 points in 15 games and is going to be present at the World Juniors for Team Canada, or at least on the preliminary roster before the roster cuts come in. But sorry, to get back to Luca Morelli, really interesting player. He can play a bit of a hard-nosed style of play too. He's not averse to physicality or anything along those lines. And he's a player that can really lock down space well in his own zone. I've always really liked the transition defending ability. He keeps his gaps tight. He likes to jump up into space and activate in the offensive zone, comfortable activating up to the hash marks. And I think that there's also the tools and the mobility to be a pretty solid rush defender going the other way. So a player that can certainly help in both directions, killing plays defensively and creating plays through solid passing habits, good vision, good delay implementation in his rushes so far this season, to also be effective moving forward against professional competition. Do I think that this is going to be a top 4 defenseman for the Columbus Blue Jackets long term? Probably not. Maybe number 5 or number 4 range. I'm not going to try to pump his tires to the point of being the David Jiricek replacement just yet here, but certainly a useful prospect to have in the cupboard, and one that I think will be playing NHL minutes at some point in his career, and could certainly even be a secondary piece on a second pairing if he really hits the upper limits of his upside. But moving on to the final question of this first segment, Windmill Dynasty Hockey asks, thoughts on David Lewandowski? The numbers aren't as impressive as some of the other draft-eligible prospects, but I find myself more interested watching him than other commonly ranked first-round players. And Lewandowski is the German player playing the WHL this season, who just transferred very recently. He plays for the Saskatoon Blades, and he has scored 7 goals and 14 points in 18 games so far this season. He's been the best player for Saskatoon in a couple of the games that I've caught. He's a quick skater. He likes to get around opponents. He's not the most dynamic player with the puck on his stick. I don't think that the creativity is something that's going to unlock defenses at the next level necessarily, but he can get to the middle, decent scoring habits. I like the fact that he's a solid forechecker. He's disruptive in the defensive zone. He's constantly trying to tilt the ice in his team's favor. He's far from an all offense kind of player. He can definitely use his speed and his physicality and his intensity to disrupt play on the forecheck, on the back check. He's a very involved player, and it's quite clear that he's already had experience against pro competition while playing junior hockey now in the WHL, because he was playing in the DEL, in German's top league, this season. He played 7 games there, no points, 18 penalty minutes. He was physically involved even then. And last season, in his D-1 year, he played 13 games in the third German pro division, scoring a goal goal and 9 assists for 10 points in 13 games. So a player that has already played against older competition. He plays with intensity. I can't say I agree that he's a first-round talent, at least in my eyes, from what I've seen so far, much as I would love to pump the tires of a German player, considering that I am German myself, and seeing German hockey blossom is something that always brings a smile to my face. But still, I think that he's an interesting prospect, probably a B grade, maybe C grade, but definitely a player that's in the conversation in that like 45 to 70 range, which is still very much in development at this point. We're still early in the draft cycle. Things are still shifting. I'd love to see him climb those boards higher with a bit more production. But as our commenter says, he's a very fun player to watch because he is so involved physically. So thank you very much for that question. But that wraps up this first segment. In the next one, we're going to keep answering some questions, including a question that is Habs related, asking whether or not the Habs have been unlucky with their first overall picks in recent years in terms of on what years their bad performances fall. So we'll dig into that in the next segment, as well as a couple other questions. But first, a quick message from our sponsors over at FanDuel. Get ready to tackle the NFL action on FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Because right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if you win. The FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything you need to place live bets on the NFL, all in one place. So when you get a hunch in the middle of a game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more in the exact same place where you place your bets. Whether you want to take those swings on American football or European football with the Champions League now going in full force, or perhaps you prefer tennis or golf, or if you're listening to this podcast, just maybe hockey is your sport of choice. Whatever it may be, FanDuel has something to offer every kind of sports fan. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. You'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. That is at FanDuel.com. Never waste a hunch and make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. Alrighty, so let's keep the episode rolling here with the next question from a commenter. Demita FanCam asks, if the Habs get the first overall pick this year, would they've had the two worst first overall picks since Yakupov? I wouldn't be in panic mode about that whatsoever, in all honesty. I mean, going back through the last 10 years, there have been a couple of first overall picks that haven't panned out amazingly, but Yuri Slafkovsky is a really solid player. That's the first thing I will focus on here. Slafkovsky is a player that I think that Montreal Canadiens are going to value for a very long time, and I think that contract's going to age into something super valuable in a pretty short span of time. So I don't think that at the Slafkovsky pick was a disaster or anything. It wasn't the strongest year for first overall picks. This is true. We did not land, Habs not land like Connor Bedard or even Macklin Celebrini, right? It wasn't that caliber. But I will say the 2025 NHL draft class is being talked down a little bit in the media, especially because the depth of the class is not the strongest. When you hit 25th overall, 30th overall, 35th overall, you're not in the blue chip prospect or like clear first round talent range of talent anymore. Maybe one or two stragglers that go a bit lower than they should are still going to be on the board, but it's not the deepest class in terms of talent. At elite prospects for our first ranking meeting, we only had 22 A level prospects that we deem clear first round talents. And beyond that, there's kind of a jumble of players. That said, the top range of the draft class is really good. There's a lot to like at the top end of the draft class. Winning the draft lottery this season would be a fascinating thing. It would be unlike winning the draft lottery in typical years, in my opinion, because this is a draft class with a lot of flexibility going up to first overall. All the way at the top, there's a lot of options that seem to be pretty agreeable and for most scouts to at least be talking about, whether it be James Higgins, of course, the I guess likeliest still at this point, perhaps, but he had been going into this season likeliest to go first overall. Matthew Schaefer is a fantastic defenseman. More on him in the next segment. Michael Misa is perhaps my favorite player in this entire draft class. I think he's at number 1 on my board at the moment. And if the Habs could land a player like that, oh boy, you have your 2 centers for long term with Nick Suzuki and Michael Misa. And stylistically, you're going to love how those two could play off of each other, because you kind of have stylistically similar players pivoting each of your 2 top lines, which allows for so much flexibility of filling in the wings, mixing things up when things aren't rolling as well. I think that Michael Misa bringing defensive value as well as high-end offense, high-end intelligence, really polished, really refined. Fantastic prospect, in my opinion. Reminds me a lot of Macklin Celebrini as well, stylistically. So definitely some differences there. I'm not going to delve into all of that in today's show, but there's a lot to like in the first round this year. It is far from a disaster. If the Habs flame out, and Habs fans would be frustrated yet again, that is not a competitive season, which it has not been so far. They're, I believe, second last in the league at the time of recording. And yeah, I can understand the frustration, but there is so much to like in this draft class. Going into the top 5 range, basically, I think that there is really high-end talent of like Demidov level prospect caliber players very much available in that range. And how they're going to end up going on draft day, how they're going to be end up ranked by consensus isn't clear yet. And that's exciting and fascinating. So a really interesting year to be picking first overall, but the Habs are not there yet. They are not yet, last in the league, or initial draft lottery that would lie between them and that. So a lot of luck would have to come into play for it. But if I were a Habs fan, I would not be complaining about that. I think that would do a lot of good for this lineup. Next, Emmett Ferguson asks, thoughts on Marco Kasper's rookie season so far? Very interesting player. I've always really liked Marco Kasper, and so far this season, he's played 21 NHL games for the Detroit Red Wings, scoring 2 goals and 7 points as a responsible, like super responsible and highly intense two-way centerman. He's he is such a dog on the puck in and around the net. It is hilarious to watch him play at times. The intensity, the desire to create the smallest of advantages down low. He's a great player that I can understand why Steve Yzerman really wanted him and picked him 8th overall in order to secure his services. A player that wasn't projected to go top 10, was perhaps expected to go a bit more in that 15 to 20 range. Maybe someone reaching on him in that 10 to 15 range, but 8th was a bold decision for the Detroit Red Wings, and it's been paying off. I mean, he's been playing some excellent hockey since being drafted in 2022. In his D+1 season, he played in the SHL for Rögle, great development program, and he played in 52 games, scoring 8 goals and 23 points. And then last season, played an excellent year in the AHL, scoring 14 goals and 35 points in 71 games. So very linear progression for this player. He's just constantly improving. He's always getting better. I've loved what I've seen in the NHL for him so far. He's kept what makes him valuable very, very close at hand in every single game. He's still playing with intensity. He's making simple plays very quickly, very effectively. You're not going to ask Marco Kasper to go for your end-to-end rushes, dissecting whole defensive structures, but he's a really good give-and-go player. He plays at high pace. He plays with intensity, and he's bringing that to Detroit. He's going to need a bit more time to develop into a clear top 6 talent. His ice time has been kind of fluctuating in that middle 6 range so far this season, but his most recent game, he logged 19 minutes and 45 seconds. He's gaining confidence. He also tallied 2 assists in a really close loss against a strong Vancouver Canucks team. So a player that's coming into form, coming into his own, that I think will be a valuable piece for Detroit's middle 6 long term. Hopefully that will be on a second line rather than a third, but a lot of kind of players in his mold are in that system. Guys like Nate Danielson as well would come to mind, and Michael Brandling-Nugard. So a lot to like here with Marco Kasper. Very interesting player. Final question of the segment. Luke Heinzman asks, can you see Jake O'Brien being a top 10 pick by draft time? He's starting to flash the shot more from what I've seen. Top 10 would be a little bit rich for me, but I can see where it's coming from. This is a really intelligent playmaking center, 6'2", 170 pounds, so has a lot of growing room physically. He's young for the draft class. He's a June 16th, 07 birthday. Right shot center as well, which a lot of teams also want value and lack in their lineups. And he's been playing some really solid hockey in the OHL for the Brantford Bulldogs. He was over a point a game last season, and is D-1 as being a very young draft year player, so doing it as a very young D-1. 64 points in 61 games, 13 goals, and 51 assists. He's definitely a player that leans heavier on the playmaking ability, the passing game, than he does on the goal scoring. And that's a good thing. The goal scoring isn't the strongest that I've seen in terms of habits or in terms of shot power, especially. Adding weight will certainly help with that. But I don't think that this is a player that needs to or should be transformed into a shoot first kind of player. He's a play connector. He's a really cerebral centerman that can support play down low, support it through transition, and support it off puck in the offensive zone. He's going to be a guy that can elevate more dynamic players. He has some flashes of dynamism, but this isn't the player that's going to lead rushes solo or like Marco Kasper dissect defensive structures. He's not that kind of player, but he is a really good play connector. He's able to elevate players around them, make them better, make their lives a bit easier while playing really good two-way hockey. He's not always the most flashy of players. He can be a bit boring at times by playing some low event hockey in important games in the OHL, but he plays that role really, really well. He's a smart player who really effectively pulls out his assignments, and a solid prospect. I think this is more a guy that goes in that 15 to 22 range of the draft rather than top 10. But if the goal scoring can keep progressing and really evolve out of being a bit of an offensive weakness, which I don't quite think it has just yet, unlike our commenter, then maybe it's possible. It's far from an impossibility. But that wraps up this the second segment. In the final one, we'll be answering a couple final questions, including on how me and Hattie switched from dumper prospects to elite prospects. So we have a little bit of that in the final segment, as well as a hockey question or two. But before that, a quick word from our sponsors here at Locked On NHL Prospects. Alrighty, let's wrap up the show here. So, final question from Twitter. Loch Ness Monster asks, where would Matthew Schaefer be in the group of top six or the six best defensemen from the 2024 draft class? Artem Levshinov, Sam Dickinson, Carter Yakimchuk, Zeev Buyum, Anton Salayev, and Zane Parekh. Where do you rank Schaefer in that group? Number one. Without too much hesitation, I love a lot of the defensemen that were in last year's draft class. It was a fantastic year for defensemen. Artem Levshinov, really toolsy. I think he's still quite raw. I would not have progressed him to the AHL this season. There's definitely still some holes in his game, but the upside, the physical tools are fantastic. And I think that with a bit more comfort and dare in his offensive game, or comfort within the dare in the offensive game, that he could really become an impactful piece for Chicago. But yeah, he was, the second overall pick from last season. He was not my top ranked defenseman. That would have been, I believe, Zane Parekh was my number one, or was it Zeev Buyum? I forget. I had three defensemen back to back, basically, with Buyum and Parekh and Levshinov. And Parekh and Buyum are fantastic, highly intelligent players that I think are going to be impactful NHL players for a really long time. And I don't think it's going to take them very long to become that. Zeev Buyum probably as of next season, Zane Parekh maybe the year after that. Even so, even with Zane Parech's insane offensive ability, which Matthew Schaefer does not match, Schaefer is an elite level two-way defenseman in the mold that you build a contending team around as a pillar on the blue line, in my opinion. From what I've seen so far, that would be my current projection for him. And I think that makes him a contender at first overall this season. He isn't at first overall on my board personally, but he's in the tier with James Higgins, with Michael Misa. Those are my top three at the moment, Porter Martone being a smidgen below them. But those three players I think are real game changers, and Schaefer's one of them. He's young for the draft class. He has a lot of development room still. He's an elite level skater in all four directions, so fluid. He's able to stick with puck carriers, shut things down in transition while defending the rush. He can activate up. He's so comfortable jumping in as a fourth forward when the opportunity presents itself, and it's an intelligent risk to take. Really good risk assessment, really refined and mature and polished and smart, and a lot of adjectives can be used here. But he's a player that, from the blue line, in terms of maturity paired with difference-making physical tools, not a defensive prospect I've seen in recent years. I haven't seen that mold of player in the 2024 draft class. I didn't see that mold of player in the 2023 draft class. And even going back beyond that, a couple of seasons, I think, like 2022, sure, Simon Nemec would be refined in similar ways, mature player. But Matthew Schaefer's physical tools are better, and he's a lot more refined and polished than Jiricek was in his draft year. Yeah, he's a special talent. He's a player that stands out from the fray among defensemen that came through the draft in the last couple of seasons, in my opinion. He's a player that would have been the top defenseman of the 2024 group, in my opinion. That's Matthew Schaefer, a player that we will be talking about a lot more as the year progresses still. Then moving on to YouTube, we have a couple comments here that are a bit more personally aimed. Starting off with a question from Mighty D_93. How do you rein in your enthusiasm when for a player whose style you really like? Hyperphysical, for example, and evaluate or rank the players in an unbiased and objective way. I assume a portion of it is being part of the scouting team and hearing other scouts' arguments. I'd be curious to hear one player you fought for who panned out and one who didn't. Excellent question. I probably should have reserved a bit more time to answer this in this one, because I would have liked to take a full segment almost for this question. But yeah, it's tough to rein in your enthusiasm, but a lot of it also just comes from experience, right? When I've done this for about 4 years now, 4 draft cycles, that I've been really tuned in like this, and had those kind of takes of players I liked more than consensus and players I liked less than consensus. And there are definitely some misses along the way. But you learn from them. You learn why you maybe missed to a certain degree. Like, for instance, I would say one of my early misses wasn't a miss in putting a certain player way too high, though there definitely were instances of that. But it was the opposite. It was Owen Power. I had a lot of question marks with Owen Power. I liked the offensive flashes. I liked the physical tools. I was really worried about the defense in many ways, and thought that he was being overvalued by consensus of being kind of shoot in as like the default number one in that draft class. And I had him ranked 9th overall. That was way too low. That was a complete overcorrection. I personally preferred, I think I had William Eklund at number 1 that year, and then Matty Beniers at 2 and Jesper Wallstedt at 3. Would I take Owen Power over Jesper Wallstedt today? Yeah, I probably would, right? So definitely some learning along the way of certain takes that didn't pan out and others that did. I mean, the one, a couple ones that did for me, Logan Stankoven I had ranked, I believe, around 15th or 13th overall in his draft year. Stand by that. I had Lane Hudson ranked 11th overall in his draft year. I stand by that. I really like both of those players in their draft years. Beyond that, in terms of more recent, perhaps, in 2023, I ranked Zach Benson at 5th overall and thought that he would potentially be NHL ready straight out of the gate. I stand by that. I mean, he was quite effective in the NHL as a rookie last season. And while his upside, I don't think, is as high as guys like Will Smith, who I had ranked below him, I think that was a pretty big take to have Zach Benson that high up the board. I'd probably put Ryan Leonard above Benson now in a redraft, but still, I'm very happy I had Benson in that range. But again, there were certainly some misses along the way. Like Luca Cagnoni was a player I paid a lot of attention to because Hattie was the biggest fan of Cagnoni. Like had him like ranked like 17th overall or something crazy up in the first round. And I watched him a lot and really wanted to like him, but just didn't fully commit to that risk. So I kept him down at like 35th overall in 2023. I kind of wish I had kind of just taken that leap, which Hattie took in like September of the draft cycle, of course. But yeah, I think that there's definitely a couple there that are learning processes. But in terms of reining yourself in with players that you like, it's yes, listening to what other scouts have to say, the doubts they have, and looking into that with curiosity as well, and not just trying to be defensive over the prospects that you like, but keeping an open mind to it all. I think when you start getting defensive about prospects that like you kind of hedged your bets on, that's when you get into real bias territory. Beyond that, in terms of stylistic preferences, every scout has some stylistic preferences, but you have to be able to look beyond that at the value as well and try to balance those things out and kind of keep yourself accountable in that facet. With the final question of the day, we are running overtime because we had some good questions here. We have a question here from Sandinista 33, who asks, how did you and Hattie get swooped up by EP? Did they come for one and you demanded the other to come along, or did you two fine gentlemen, like, were you a package deal? Keep doing you. Your content is consistently excellent. Well, thank you very much. Very flattering. And no, that like Elite Prospects contacted us both individually, privately, and we both privately, personally made the decision to make the switch. So it had nothing to do of like we demanding it to be a package deal. They individually wanted each of us, and we were both very happy to make that switch and very excited. And it's been a wonderful time at Elite Prospects so far, working with some very bright minds and kind people. So it's been great. And yeah, so thank you very much for your question. And that wraps up the Mailbag show for today. Thank you so much for tuning in. If you're watching on YouTube, please leave us a comment down below. Leave us more questions for the next Mailbag episode, please. And if you're listening to your favorite on your favorite podcasting platform, make sure to make us your first listen of the day. We always really appreciate our everydayers. Thank you so much for tuning in. And for your second listen of the day, you can head on over to Locked On Sports Today, a 24-hour news show that brings you all the news that you could possibly want to have access to in the sporting world. But that wraps things up here for me. I'm Sebastian High, the USHL scout over at Elite Prospects, and thank you so much for tuning in.